It's very interesting if you look at so many cases just recently. Let's look at Ukraine. Maybe historians, Peter will probably tell us one day, or the generation that will follow, what really was the motivations of the United States in overthrowing the democratically elected government. Things didn't go on the way they hoped for, so it was Russia's fault. Syria, that conflict started all the way back in 2012. Russia wasn't involved in it at all, but when things started going wrong, of course it was the Russians that did it. That's why the country is still broken at war. And we could go on and on. We could go with the election in the United States. Hillary Clinton lost, the favorite of the mainstream media lost. Somehow it must be someone else's fault. It must be Russia. Russia plays the scapegoat role that you have in the title of your book. Go ahead, Dan.
Yes, exactly. And I think what else is going on is psychological projection. We tend to blame others, and most notably these days Putin in Russia, for things we're doing, right? So as you say, people are like, well, what about Putin in Syria? In fact, the conflict in Syria goes way back before 2012. We know from Seymour Hersh and others that the U.S. was supporting jihadists in Syria as far back as 2006 or so in order to destabilize the region and take power away from Iran, and then when things go bad in Syria, not surprisingly, because we're supporting jihadists, and Assad invites Russia in to help them, all of a sudden, as you say, it's Putin's fault. Similarly, in the Ukraine, as you mentioned, the U.S. supported at least 2 coups there in this century, and in the case of the most recent one in 2014, we have partnered in part with neo-Nazis in that country. And again, when Russia is called in by ethnic Russians in the Donbass to help them with their legitimate concerns, again, it's all Putin's fault. And so again, we see there's a sort of ahistoricalness about how Americans, I think, view the world. And I've compared it to the movie Groundhog Day. For us, history starts anew every single day. Yeah. And so what that allows us to do is to forget about the last war we were lied in, and therefore we're able to be lied into the next one. And I think that's exactly what's happening here. Russia continues to be the scapegoat to legitimize the U.S.'s constant war footing, which is not only bad for the rest of the world, but is bad for this country.
Sure. Alexander, what...
Dan?
Go ahead, Peter, jump in. That's the point of the program. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that Groundhog Day has a happy ending. So hopefully hopefully something good will come out of this relationship between the United States and Russia, similar to the relationship in Groundhog Day.
Well, this is such a depressing
topic. I'm trying to get it right.
No, this is a really depressing subject, and I'm glad you brought some levity to it, Peter. Thank you. Let me go to Alex here in Moscow. It's perilous not to have a relationship with Russia, okay? One of the things I've said for years now on this program is that the United States and Russia, Russia and the West, of what we could call it, they do not necessarily have to be friends, and I think there are trajectories that show that they will not be friends because the West is a post-cultural, postmodern environment now. Russia is a very conservative place, and people like it that way, all right? But it is perilous not to have some kind of understanding, at least, with Russia and the West, particularly with the United States, because of so many issues that are happening in the world. I think that is not clearly understood in particularly Washington, because it's Groundhog Day. It's every day starts over and over again. They're not thinking about the future. Go ahead, Alexander.
Well, the point to understand about Russia is firstly, it is a nuclear superpower. It has the capacity to destroy the United States, just as the United States has the capacity to destroy Russia. And if they go to war with each other, they will take down much of the world with them. The Russians are very conscious of this, and their policy is to do everything they possibly can within reason to prevent that happening. That ought to provide a community of interest between these two countries. So when one says that these two countries don't have to be enemies, it is in their interests that they are not enemies. Adversaries in some situations, possibly. Partners in others, hopefully. But enemies would be extremely unwise and very dangerous for the world and for humanity as a whole.
Peter, you know, one of the things I find very perilous, and your work with Oliver Stone in The Untold History of the United States is superb. I really suggest viewers to take a look at it here, is that it seems to me that there is some kind of collective amnesia. There were some very troubling times during the Cold War that needed really strong leadership from both countries, I would say, to be able to back off from the Rubicon here. I am very worried. I'm terrified that people in the foreign policy blob have just simply forgotten how dangerous the world can be. And when there's so many other things that could be dealt with together, okay? But not being friends, being pragmatic, that's enough. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, Alexander makes a very good point in bringing up the nuclear conflict.
Yeah.
The United States and Russia, between ourselves, have between 93 and 94% of the world's nuclear weapons right now. We have more than 1,000 nuclear weapons on hair trigger alert pointed at each other. We know the numbers on this. The estimate is that even in a limited nuclear war between India and Pakistan, which 100 Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons were used, that could lead to partial nuclear winter and up to 2 billion people being killed. There are presently about 15,000 nuclear weapons in the world. Russia and the United States have most of them. So for no other reason, just because of the nuclear threat, we've got to begin to deal with these questions. Get those weapons off hair trigger alert immediately. Putin and Trump could do that. But the broader perspective that you're talking about, we should be friends. And there have been times when we have reached out to each other. We can talk about 1942, right, when Franklin Roosevelt talked about the 4 policemen, and U.S. and the Soviet Union and China and Britain policing the world to create peace and stability. We can talk about 1945, before Roosevelt died. We can talk about what would have happened in 1945 if Henry Wallace had become president, as he should have, instead of Harry Truman. But perhaps the best example is the Cuban Missile Crisis. Sure. What happened in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis? Khrushchev, on October 30th, writes a letter to Kennedy, a remarkable letter, and he said, "From evil some good must come. Our people have felt the flames of thermonuclear warfare. What we have to do now is eliminate every crisis, every conflict that could possibly cause war between our two countries." And he started to enumerate them. And for the last year of the Kennedy presidency, Kennedy and Khrushchev were moving toward that kind of resolution to ending the Vietnam War, ending the space race, doing a lot of things that would have changed the world. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But we can begin doing that again. In many ways, we're closer now than we were at that point.
Well, yes and no. I think we're much further away in another instance. I mean, the irony of course it is, Peter, is that that was a Cold War with 2 opposing ideological world systems, okay? That is not the case today. It is not ideological, and at least not to the extent it was then. Okay, but Dan, Peter just spoke sense. He gave really very good historical examples. But I look at American mainstream media and some British media every single day. I see the opposite. I see people want a drumbeat to some kind of conflict. We have to go after them. We have to punish them. We have to make them pay for a hoax, the way I see it here. But the rhetoric is completely the opposite. I mean, and Donald Trump, for all of his flaws, I thought that he made a very good speech in Warsaw, and he talked about mutual values, many values that Vladimir Putin speaks about all of the time. Go ahead, Dan.
Yes, well, I totally agree with you. And bizarrely, as you say, the media, particularly MSNBC, CNN, there's conversations on those shows which seem to indicate they would have welcomed World War III,
sure.
Which is insane, obviously. And it's bizarre that this is coming from liberals, both in the media and in the population. Maxine Waters, I'm a left of center guy. Okay, I'll be clear. I basically don't like anything about Trump except for the fact that he wants to have a friendship or a partnership with Russia and possibly, you know, stop some of these crazy interventions. You would think that that would be the one thing that liberals could, you know, applaud and support. Instead, you know, you see, again, Maxine Waters upset that Trump and Putin sat down and agreed to a ceasefire in Syria, which, again, seems like, you know, a sane person would welcome that. Why do we want conflict with Russia? As has been noted, the only good, there's no good that can come out of that. In fact, you could have a catastrophic nuclear war that comes out of that.
Okay.
According to the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. Right. Yeah.
Okay, we're running out of time here. Alexander, we're closer now
to nuclear war than we've been. Yes.
Alexander here in Moscow.
Since 1953.
The irony, of course, is as Peter was mentioning, is, you know, during the Cold War, capitalist America and Soviet Russia, they sat down and talked. But when Donald Trump talks to Vladimir Putin, it's treasonous. But everything is flipped upside down. 30 seconds, Alexander. Last word goes to you.
I think one of the great problems is that the United States believes, wrongly in my opinion, that it won the previous Cold War. And it is very angry with the fact that it's now turned out that that isn't quite how the Russians see it. And this is one of the major concerns that the Americans have with the Russians, and one of the great causes of friction. The Americans need to put that behind them. Donald Trump, for all his many flaws, seems to understand this. And I think many people in the United States are very angry with Donald Trump because he is a realist on precisely
good. He's a realist. We'll end on that point. Many thanks to my guests in Washington, Pittsburgh, and here in Moscow. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, crosstalk rules.